If I meet a friend who only goes to synagogue on Yom Kippur and he says, I don't really feel much, I'm like, I don't blame you, man. Like, if you call your girlfriend once every 365 days, you're not going to build that intimate, vulnerable, open connection.
You are not our enemies. We do not want to fight you. But if you fight us, we will fight you like we fought the British. We should see Palestinians suffering and feel it as if it's our suffering. These are our cousins suffering on our land. Judaism isn't just something to restrict you and something to follow just because you have to.
Why is your message resonating so much? All right, my brother.
How are you?
Thank God. Good. How are you?
Baruch Hashem.
I'm so glad we're able to do this, put this together.
For sure.
So I really believe life is about personal growth, inner growth. And the best way to grow is to confront difficult, challenging situations in pursuit of truth. And I feel like you really embody that. And I'd love to hear how you got to this place in your life, a little bit about your background and what you're doing now.
So I think it's like a whole process and evolution that got me to this point. And of course, I think everyone goes through a sort of evolution within their lives, and I definitely have much more to go. So I was born in France, moved to Israel when I was 3, then to Miami when I was 5, and I had a very quick identity crisis growing up because on one side of the family I'm Ashkenazi, the other side of the family I'm Sephardic. Yet I was raised completely Sephardic, but going to a Jewish day school. Rabbis would tell me because your dad is technically Ashkenazi, that makes you Ashkenazi, even though I grew up eating like couscous and doing the dafina for Shabbat and all these things that had nothing to do with Ashkenazi culture. And even so, like growing in Miami, no one was really American. So you were always identifying as you're from somewhere else, mostly Latin American Jews. So they were identifying as Argentinian, Venezuelan, Colombian, Jamaican, it's not Jamaican, but Cuban and so on. In public school, you had Jamaican and Haitian. So everyone identified as from somewhere else. And I was always told that I was the French kid. And when I'd visit family in France, I was the American cousin. So very quickly, I started to really try to find the answer for myself. Where am I from and who am I? And that answer should not be based on what someone else expects, but what answer I can find and what I relate to. After an anti-Semitic experience with my mother at the age of 7, that kind of put everything into perspective, and I realized that it didn't matter really where I was born, grew up, lived in, traveled to, resided in, or what I believed or didn't believe in, that no matter what, I'd be seen and I would be a Jew. And that led me to further questions. What does it even mean to be a part of this Jewish people? Is it just a religion? Is it a belief system? Is it more than a belief system, which includes a belief system, but also is an identity, a history, a culture, a civilization, connection to a land, connection to a higher power, connection to a purpose? And I started to really study that and understand what Judaism means in its core, and not just on the surface level of its definition of what we impose with an English word like religion, which doesn't even have any relation to the Hebrew language and to the Torah. And I understood that being a Jew is way more than just this secondary belief system, but it's my primary and core identity of who I am as a person, where I come from, where I belong, and what I'm supposed to do in this world as an individual and also a part of a collective. And this sort of understanding grew and evolved with time. Joined the army right out of high school. Then after high school, after the army, I started university in the US, and that's when I became an activist against anti-Semitism and trying to empower the next generation of Jews on college campuses and in intellectual spaces. And now it's evolved into more macro level on social media and trying to reach the masses. And I do many other things such as Habayit, that unites Israelis and Palestinians on the ground, Vision, that tries to unite the sectors of Israeli society and educate the next generation, or the videos that many people know me for, whether it's debating people or breaking down complex issues.
I love that, man. Both outwardly confronting challenge in joining the army and doing literally physical challenges, and then also internal battles to step forward, to educate yourself, everything involved in that. So you and I actually got connected earlier last year. There was a bit of a choppy time between African American and Jewish relationships in America. There was Eagles wide receiver Deshaun Jackson and NBA analyst Steven Jackson and others posted quotes from attributing to Hitler about Jewish people trying to dominate the America and the world, and a lot of it connected to leadership like Minister Louis Farrakhan and Al Sharpton in the past. The relationship between black people and Jewish people, which you would think would be something where we have such a shared history of oppression, and so much that we could find common ground on, was really at a difficult place. And someone asked me to come on to a YouTube debate with young Pharaoh, and it turned into a really big debate about, are white people inferior and are Jewish people today the real Jews of the Torah? And we had a great conversation about a few times about what all of this meant. And I was curious your thoughts on your experience with this relationship between the Jewish community and the Black community, and also what do you think are ways forward that we could find ways to improve the relationship?
So I don't think we only have shared experiences, we also have shared unity. Like there were times where the Jews and the Black people or people of color within the US were very much so in line, and many Jewish lawyers helped Black people achieve their civil rights within America. So we don't have a history of only a shared experience, we also had unity. But obviously that unity isn't the same as it used to be because there isn't this coalition and this understanding of each other's identities. And I think if we want to understand why the Jews are always hated from any extreme group, whether they're people of color, whether it's people on the right, on the left, whatever side that one has, usually in every extreme group, the Jew tends to be the source of the problem. And that's really in white societies or in most Western societies, the Jews are always placed in the middle. You know, whether it's the tax collectors where, you know, they're collecting taxes and they're not collecting it for themselves, they're collecting it for the king and queen, but the Jew is the experience of the oppression. The Jew is the source of the pain. And that's how the Jew is always depicted to every society that is usually on the bottom and is being oppressed. And because they don't know us and they don't have a connection to us, they don't understand our identity, they don't understand our history, they don't understand what we go through and what we aspire to achieve, they tend to very easily be manipulated and convinced that we are actually the representation of their suffering. And I think when it comes to the story of who is a real Jew, well, a Jew is not only those that descend from Am Yisrael, but someone whose soul is Jewish, which even a convert can be a Jew. It's a Jewish soul born into a non-Jewish body that goes through a very long process and that have to be accepted by a group of elders into our community and be accepted as one of the Jewish people. When it comes to this story of this Black Israelite or, you know, are all Black people Jews and all white people not Jews? Well, first of all, Jews are not white. Even Ashkenazi Jews, which are lighter in skin pigmentation, are not white. And I make this statement because when we're talking about the concept of white, it's not about one skin color. Because you can have an albino African with very pale skin, and they're not considered white. You can have someone who's Asian, right? Let's say Japanese, Korean, or Chinese with very pale skin, and they're not considered white. So white is more than just your skin color. It's about your origins and your status. And when we try to break down the origins and the status of the Jewish people, our origins is from the Middle East, from the Levant, from the land of Israel. Even Ashkenazi Jews, which are traditionally the more paler skinned Jews, which there are many Ashkenazi Jews that are not so pale skinned, and there are many Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews that are pale skinned. But let's just say, for the most part, they have more traditionally pale skin. Their genetics is clearly linked to the Middle East. Their culture, their language, their history, their value system, their traditions, the way they pray, what direction they pray towards, everything about them is clearly a Middle Eastern people that has been displaced for an extended period of time in Europe. So Europe is our experience, not our origins. It's not our origins according to archaeology, according to genetics, according to history, according to anything. Now, our status, if we look at the history of the Jewish people in white communities, has never been white. Right? We weren't allowed to own land. We were not allowed to participate in agrarianism, which was the form of commerce that existed back then. We were always persecuted, whether blamed for the death of Jesus, blamed for the Black Plague, blamed for the economic situation leading to the Spanish Inquisition, blamed the economic situation in Germany post-World War I, leading to World War II and the Holocaust. We're always seen as the scapegoat within white societies. So all of a sudden today, Jews are white. Now, sure, you can be white passing in certain circumstances, or let's say a Jew, not yourself, because you look Jewish. You have a beard, you have a kippah, you have a tzitzit. It doesn't matter what color your skin is, you will never be white passing. Now, let's say you take a Jew who is more paler or fairer in skin and does not wear anything Jewish. Maybe in a certain circumstance, they can be white passing in a situation. But wait till you listen to what name that they have. All of a sudden you hear their name is David Goldberg or Shoshana. So we have to really understand that this concept of whiteness is a more nuanced conversation. And a lot of people that are people of color who have an experience of oppression, especially in white societies, do not understand how other communities that are not sharing their same experience, may have similar ones, but are not sharing, may also not be white. So let's say someone has a list, right? And there's David Goldberg, and there's Joe Smith. And Joe Smith is extremely Black. And David Goldberg is extremely light-skinned. Who has white privilege in this sense? Or who is white passing, right? So the concept of white passing is a very nuanced conversation that has to be understood and broken down. And we should not use one group's oppression and experience to justify the fact that no other community, or minimize the fact that other communities experience other forms of oppression in that society. And I think this conversation has not been a conversation that's taken place within, let's say, America, which we both grew up in. So a lot of Jews do not understand the struggles that people of color face in America, do not understand the situation that comes when it's, coming to policing, when it's coming to the education systems, people not having the same opportunities based on the tax zones that they live in, the way that they do the prison industrial complex and they make someone a felon, forcing someone to go into a gang if they're not already in one, and then forcing them to stay in one when they come out and be repeated customers because they can't find a job. And so there's a whole system that exists that's systemic a problem within the US that has to be understood that isn't from the Jewish side. But on the other side, they also don't understand our issues that we've been dealing with within the society. So I think we need to have this conversation and to be able to understand that we both have suffering. We're not playing victim Olympics to find out who is suffering more, or let's use one suffering to turn it against each other. We actually are keys to unlocking the greater problems that exist, and we have to be using that to move forward.
I love that. I'm getting a lot of DMs since that experience from the Black community that want to learn more and want to connect and really appreciated the conversation. So I'm looking forward to doing more in that, and we can be in touch on things of that nature. My father is South African from Lithuania, and my mother is French Algerian, going back thousands of years. And when I used to fill out the SAT form, I didn't know what to put. There was Caucasian. I was like, I guess, but there was African American. There was the Jewish wasn't an option. So. Yeah, it's much more nuanced than just Jews are white. I mean, that's ridiculous.
But even Algeria and Lithuania was their experience. It wasn't their origins. So I think that a lot of times when Jews talk about, my family was from Germany or from Poland or from Morocco and Algeria, or Ethiopia, that's not where they were from. That's where we're talking amongst Jews that we had an experience in to understand what is your experience, what are your customs, what are your traditions. But I think that we miss the problem that when we talk to the world, they don't understand that that's what we're speaking about. They think that we're talking about our origins, and then this concept of one people from a land doesn't make sense anymore.
Absolutely. We're going to get into that a little bit. So I think what you're doing now, which I want to talk about, the documentary you're working on, could be a great way to heal and educate between the Black and Jewish community and just in general. So many are not familiar with the fact that back in Israel, the 12 tribes were in Israel, and in, I believe, the 8th century BCE, the Assyrians came in and really ran roughshod and conquered a lot of northern Israel, and that included 10 of the tribes of Israel that had to be resettled elsewhere, and in some of them in Africa. And I know the Igbo Jews, I believe, connect back to the tribe of Gad. They claim to connect back to the tribe of Gad that was removed from Israel. And I'm just very interested in this documentary you're doing about
We Were Never Lost.
We Were Never Lost. And what motivated you to do it? What inspired you to do it? I'd love to hear more.
So first I'm going to touch on how this can actually relate to a lot of the struggles that you were talking about right now with the communities here in America that are having this sort of problem in finding their relations. First of all, 20% of the transatlantic slave trade were Igbos from Nigeria. So there is a fact that a lot of people of color, Black people in America, actually descend from this group that claims to be Jewish that could very well have Jewish origins.
Granted, a small percentage of the Igbos today are claiming to be Jewish, but it doesn't mean that there weren't more in the past.
Because they were forcibly converted to Christianity, and only a small percentage of them have kept their traditions, but even that small percentage identifies the whole group as the descendants of this lost tribe or this disconnected community, even though only a few of them kept their traditions. So first of all, there's that to understand. Then there's another element that the Jewish people are very lucky because we've kept our identity. We know where our origins are from. We know which country. We may have lost our tribe. I have not lost my tribe. I'm Levite from both sides of the family. But the vast majority of the Jewish people still know that we come from one nation, one people, one land, even though we may not have the tribe that we come from. When it comes to the Black experience in not only North America, but also in the Caribbean and in South America, they don't know where they come from. They don't know what tribe. They know they come from this continent. They know they went through slavery. They know that at some point something happened that got them to come here, but they can't relate to one culture. And Africa is not one culture. Africa is an entire huge region of this world, and there's so many different cultures and nations there. So there's this disconnect within a lot of the experience of those that have been taken as slaves or taken for whatever reason and brought to the Americas, that they don't know where they originate from, so they're hungry and they're looking for a sense of identity. So we need to understand that, because then it becomes very easy for an individual, like you said, Farrakhan, to come in and to give them an identity, which for them is something necessary, but to give it to them in a wrong way to to weaponize them against other communities and to really use them, which is a whole other conversation. In terms of this project, how it started. Well, I was a student at Columbia University. This was around maybe 2016, 2017. I was around 24 years old. I would go often to the Chabad house for Rabbi Bloom and his family. And one day I'm at the house, and there's a woman who comes in with this really unique looking kippah. It's clearly something handmade. It was sort of round and then it went flat, and there was a menorah, and it's something that I had never seen. And I'm extremely fascinated by anything related to the Jewish people or Jewish culture or Jewish history. And so I asked her, where did you get this kippah from? I've never seen something like it. And she's like, oh, I actually came back from a trip to Uganda with my husband on our honeymoon trip, and here are some pictures of this community in the middle of nowhere, black Africans that are also Jews, that are living in the middle of nowhere in these hut-like structures, with one of the huts having a Magen David clearly being the synagogue. And I was shocked. The feeling was not so much of excitement, was a sort of guilt. How is it that I don't know that they exist? The analogy I give to explain this is that imagine you're 24 years old and you find out that you have a brother or sister that you never knew about. And the feeling that you got is usually, this relationship was stolen from me. I should have had this relationship my whole life with my brother or sister, and I didn't until this day. So now I need to do the work to catch back on lost time. So I started to research, and I found out about the Igbos in Nigeria, and the Lemba in Zimbabwe, and Jews in Tanzania, and in Madagascar, and in Gabon, and in Cote d'Ivoire, and in Ghana, and in Congo, and really so many places across Africa. And each of these stories are unique and different to one another. It's not one story that really blankets over all of them, and each their individual stories. And me and the filmmaker that I work with always, Andrew, we've been talking about going to Africa for a long time, sort of doing guerrilla style video shoots the way we usually do. Me and him, we'll go, one camera, one man, we'll film it, and we'll share these stories to social media. And then we met a producer who's very seasoned in the industry, and he told us that we were thinking too small and we needed to give this the attention that it needs and go for a larger market and make it something more macro for the society. And the goal of this project is not only to reconnect these disconnected communities back to the greater whole of Am Yisrael, for at the very least for us to be connected, to know of each other and to help with one another. But also, I realized that when we unpack these stories, when we share these stories and bring them to light in the world, we're actually telling the story of the collective of the Jewish people. Because they've gone through persecution, they've kept oral traditions. There are some tribes there that have this genetic marker that connect them back to Am Yisrael. There are some tribes that converted to Judaism. So what does it mean to be a convert? What does it mean to have this genetic connection? What does it mean to have this oral tradition? What does it mean to keep your Judaism even in the face of persecution? These are all parallels to the greater story of the Jewish people. And I feel that when we're telling their story, we're also able to tell our story in the process. And we're able to find those similarities and also change the way the world understands who the Jewish people are. And I think it goes even much further. I think that a big problem for the Jews around the world is assimilation. And in assimilation in the sense that Jews don't connect anymore to their identity, to who they are, to where they're from, to their traditions, don't seek to pass it down because they don't understand it in the first place. And all of a sudden, when you see a documentary of Jews going through such struggles, but yet still keeping their Judaism, still keeping their identity, then I think when we unpack that story, it will reconnect and reignite the flame within many Jews around the world to explore their own identities. And just to finish off how this name came to be, We Were Never Lost, we've always heard about the lost tribes. And when I was speaking to a group of the Igbo leaders one time on Zoom, they were getting very emotional. Every time I speak to them, it's like, finally someone recognizes us, finally someone sees us, finally someone cares about us. And it's a very emotional experience. And in response, I said, I can't wait for the world to find out who the lost tribes were. And the response to me was, we find the term lost tribe a little bit offensive. And I said, how come? It was like, because to us, we were never lost. And that's when I knew that that was going to be the title of the film.
I love that. Lost to us, but not to them. And it is incredibly inspiring to see Jews have self-sacrifice for Judaism that we take for granted as being something that's easy to do. When I was in high school, the Abu Yada rabbi and his brother, who was the cantor, actually came to visit as well. And I know exactly the kippah you're talking about, blue knitted one, and with the menorah. And he sang the most beautiful song, and it was really eye-opening to me as well to see that. It was incredible, actually. And I just want to share, when I was, my brother was on Birthright, and I was in Jerusalem at the same time, so I sat with him for one little event where this man was speaking, telling a story. And the story he said was that he was one of the IDF leaders for the Operation Solomon, which I believe was 1991, from Ethiopia to take on planes Ethiopian Jews to Israel. And he described an incredible journey of how they went through the forest and they had to defend their lives against the Ethiopian army, a whole thing. And when they got to the clearing where the plane was, he said nobody would board the plane. And he's like, well, nobody's boarding the plane. And then he noticed one of the older boys whisper in the ears, because the kids were separated from the parents. The parents said, we'll meet you later, hopefully, but we just want you to free. There was starvation and a lot of issues in Ethiopia at the time. And when they reached the plane, so this older boy whispered in the ear of a couple boys, they spread it around, and they all boarded the plane. So this man says, I asked him, what did you say? He said, in the prophets, in the book of prophets, it says that we will return to Israel in the time of redemption on the wings of eagles. And I told them, these are the wings of eagles that the prophecy was talking about. You know, we think of an eagle, the plane. The plane could be the fulfillment of that prophecy. And he said years later, many years, like a decade later, he was sitting at a McDonald's, and this beautiful Ethiopian female soldier, woman soldier, saw him. She walked over to him. She knelt down on one knee, and she said, "Thank you for saving us." She was there during that experience. So that story always stuck with me, and that connection between Africa and Israel. And I really applaud what you're doing, and of course, am supportive any way I can. And in general, B'nai Anusim, there's so many Jews that have been around the world because of anti-Semitism and else have lost their identity. When I was in Puglia, Italy 2 summers ago, one of the tour guides said that she believed if they took a 21andMe test, a DNA test, 20 or 30%, I don't remember the number, of Italian Jews or Southern Italian Jews would have Jewish roots that just don't know. So finding those not lost tribes, but those Jews who may have need to be seen and reconnected, and that's what we all want, right? To be seen and heard and connected with, I think is very beautiful. So I wanted to pivot to the situation in Israel. And growing up, I would always, if there was a suicide bombing, if there was any attack, I'd watch television, and the Palestinian activist representative would say, it's the occupation. The occupation, the Jews are occupying our land and we're fighting back. And that's the narrative, that's the word I would hear nonstop, occupation. It always bothered me that we're occupying a place that isn't actually ours. We're foreign invaders. And I love how you utilize what I believe to be the true term of not only is it not an occupation, it's a liberation of our indigenous homeland. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the reason for why Israel exists is not because we created this great technology and we have cherry tomatoes and drip irrigation, or the fact that it's a democracy, right? There are other countries in this world that aren't democracy. No one's questioning their legitimacy, even if they don't like the way that they govern themselves. The reason Israel has a right to exist is because it's the story of a 4,000-year-old native people from the land of Judea that were forcibly displaced by a Western white imperial nation called the Romans. During their displacement, they still maintained a constant presence in their homeland where there was never a time in history without Jews. And after 2,000 years of extermination, persecution, and oppression, we created the most successful indigenous liberation movement that ever existed. And so I think when we talk about Israel in that language, people understand why we have a right to exist, where we are from, and why we came back, and that it is a liberation movement. Now in 1948, we didn't liberate the land from the Arabs, we liberated the land from the British. The British were those that were the colonizers of the land. Before that it was the Ottomans, before that we can go all the way back to when the Romans destroyed Judea. Now Judea and Samaria, what is referred to as the West Bank since the British called it that, and what the world refers it to, it's the heartland of the Jewish people. So I think that the land should be one, equal for all. Those inhabitants of the land that aren't Jewish should also have an equal right to be able to live in this land. Because if we go back to Judea, we also had non-Jews, as long as they were following the 7 laws of Noahide laws, they were allowed to live in this land. So it's fine to live in this land. I think the problem is that there are truths in both narratives. The reality is that this is not a foreign people, the Jewish people, coming and occupying the land. We've come back and we're liberating our land. However, they are experiencing us as occupiers because we put up checkpoints, we put up walls, we're still in conflict, we haven't figured out to build something that works, people are still suffering, people have to, show IDs in order to get to work or to get to their families. And this reality that exists where people are suffering is an experience of someone that doesn't understand our narrative, doesn't understand our history, doesn't understand why we're there, and they think that we are colonizers or occupiers or foreigners when we are not. And if we aren't colonizers, if we aren't foreigners, we should fix our home and find a way to live with our cousins and take the responsibility. And I'm very harsh on this, even though I'm a very proud Israeli, very proud Zionist, very proud Jew. The reality is that Israel today has way more power than the Palestinian Authority, and that most Israeli civilians have way more power than Palestinian civilians. Because I can say what I want when I want. I can be from the far right to the far left, although I reject the right and the left. I can take whatever position I want. I can criticize the government, and nothing will happen to me. However, Palestinians cannot say what they want. If they criticize the government or they normalize relations with Israelis, they are taken by the Palestinian Authority and interrogated, and they disappear maybe sometimes for 2 weeks. And it's happened to personal friends of mine that although we posted a picture, we blurred their face out, someone snitched on them and they got taken away. So they're not living in a reality where they're free to speak out, and their representation isn't truly their representation. The Palestinian Authority or Hamas do not truly represent the Palestinian people, and Israel isn't clearly in a position of power. So I'm not saying that the situation that exists is because of Israel. To the contrary, there are consequences to the attempt of ethnic cleansing of the Jews that happened in 48, in 67, and in 73, and that followed with the several wars and the intifadas that happened. The consequences of all that exist in the reality today where both sides are affected, have been affected, and are being affected. But in order to move forward, we have to realize what is the situation that exists and how do we build a better reality. And I think Israel needs to take way more of a responsibility on that.
And I want to get into that better reality that we can create, but I first think it's important that negotiation should be from a place of truth and strength. If you're always trying to fix something that you did wrong, they're just going to say, make it happen. We're not going to have patience for you. When you show that this is our connection to the land. If we're ever going to do any deal with you, it's because we're choosing to do this for a better good. It's a much more powerful place of truth as a foundation. So when you go to a place like Berkeley, I come from California, and not originally. And passing through California. And for me, I find it so laughable when I see somebody talk about occupation of land when this student at Berkeley is occupying Native American land. And the difference being that us Americans on this soil were not here originally, whereas Jewish people were in Israel originally before Muhammad was around, before modern day Islam or Palestinians were around. So if anything, any American is occupying land far more, and every country, for the most part, is occupying a land that someone else occupied, that someone else occupied. The difference being that we actually have, the Jewish people have a root there. And I was thinking of an analogy another day. You can tell me if it's off. But I said, imagine your great-grandparents lived in a house. People came, slaughtered them, and your grandparents and great-uncles ran away from the home. And one day, you as a grandchild come back to visit and to come to the home. You come back to the home, and when you open the door, you say, I don't want to take over the house. I just want a room. You can stay. Even though you took over our home and everything, it's okay. I just want to live in the room. Instead of them saying yes, they fight you, and they bring the entire neighborhood and the entire street to come fight you and kill you. You happen to win that battle, and you get the house back. And you allow the ones who tried to kill you to stay in there as well. So for me, it's just understanding the context of the situation and flipping it for the narrative, I think, is an important starting point. And how we move forward. So
let me give you my take on the analogy,
yes.
Because I think that there's another player in the story that a lot of people tend to miss. It's the British. And the British convinced both the Arabs and the Jews that their liberation were mutually exclusive and that they could not find a way to live together. And so when Israelis learn about 1948 and the relationship with what the British were doing there and before, we learn that the British were very pro-Arab. And if you look at how Palestinians and the Arab world learns about the British in relationship to Israel, they look at the Balfour Declaration, which clearly was never granted because it was written in 1917, one small little paragraph on a piece of paper, and it took till 1948, and according to official British documents, it was Jews that terrorized the British that forced them to leave. So they probably would have never left if it wasn't for that, because the saying that I love, that I heard someone else say, is that we made the price of occupation more expensive than the benefits of exploitation, forcing them to leave. However, when you look at how the British are experienced by the Arab world, they see them as very pro-Zionist and pro-Jewish. And the reality is that they were pro-neither, they were pro-the British. And so when we understand that this mentality that they're against us, and that in order for us to move forward or to get what we really want, we have to take out or to remove or to go over those on the other side, this mentality is actually where the problem relies. So within the story, there's actually one person that comes and takes away the land of the Jewish people. There are other people that move in and mix with Jews, because 30% of Palestinian DNA is actually Jewish DNA. So there's a lot of Jewish people within even Palestinians that descend from Am Yisrael. They mix together and they create this post-colonial identity being Palestinian, because the land was colonized by the Romans and renamed to Palestine, right, from Judea to Palestine. So this is the post-colonial identity that exists, that is very valid and true. And so all of a sudden, instead of this family that is very unique coming together and creating a reality that allows each of them to fulfill their aspirations, they're being taught by the people who are controlling same way as those that had originally taken this land, and they're being told that they need to hate each other and fight each other in order for them not to fight them. And we're still living in this reality where we tend to think that they're our enemy and we're their enemy, but in reality, this concept of us being the enemy is the enemy.
When did that really accelerate? Was that the First Intifada?
I mean, I think it started even with the Grand Mufti. You know, we can go even that far back, and you can look even before with the Hebron massacres. Although there were Palestinians then that were defending Jews and hiding Jews during the Hebron massacre, but these tensions that existed were really played. And this is what the British have done throughout the world. In Nigeria, they divided the three ethnic groups. They made them fight each other. In Afghanistan, they did the same. Between Pakistan and India, they did the same. So the method of the British when they were colonizing a region was usually, let's make the local ethnic groups fight each other in order for them not to fight us.
I heard from a friend that his grandfather fought both, I think the Nazis, and he fought the British when he went to Israel, and he said they took more pleasure fighting the British. Like, that's how bad it was. The British wouldn't allow the white paper, they wouldn't allow Jews to escape, to come to Israel. So it's definitely a rough time.
You know, there were the three paramilitary groups that eventually became the IDF, and one of the more notorious ones, let's say, is the Lehi, right? And in the Lehi, there were Palestinians that were in the ranks, right? They had a list to go eventually for government, and they had Palestinians with them. And they even printed out this flyer before entering and fighting different regions that were very militarized and militants, where they were hiding and attacking Jewish villages. And they have this written in Arabic saying, "You are not our enemies. We do not want to fight you. But if you fight us, we will fight you like we fought the British." And this shows that the intention of the Jewish people was never to remove Palestinians, although many Palestinians were forcefully removed, others left willingly, which exist on both ends. However, this was not the intention. This was not the goal of Zionism. The goal of Zionism was to revive our civilization and to bring the Jewish people back to Eretz Yisrael, to recreate our civilization. That didn't need to be at the cost of other people losing their lives or losing their lands. The problem is that we were convinced on both sides that we needed to fight each other. And we did. And that, because of that, people lost their lives. I know 6 people in total that were in my life that are now no longer here because of this conflict. That being said, that's not because of Palestinians, that's not because of Palestinian identity, that's not because of Palestinian self-determination. And we should not make our suffering and the negative that we experience associated to the positives that we seek to achieve. And in order to move forward, we need to understand this. I'm not saying forget the past. We definitely need to remember the past, but we need to remember it in the sense of being able to use it to not recreate it again.
I will say it's difficult to see the Palestinian liberation concept of a land without the violence, without from the river to the sea will be free, without the need to kill Jews in the process. That seems to be a major, maybe it's to stoke the pride that the
But where's this messaging from?
PLO, Yasser Arafat.
Right, and those
Hamas.
individuals, it's incentivized for them to keep this conflict going because this is how they made millions and billions of dollars.
Right.
However, if you actually meet Palestinian, and not just the average Palestinian that you meet on the street, but real leaders, in the sense that they're coming from the family that in Hebron and in Kfar Hussan and different
is what I hear.
right, these families that run these communities, and you speak to them,
Clans.
when they talk about their aspirations, nothing in their aspirations contradict what our aspirations are, and nothing exists where we seek to remove the Jewish people. That's what we were convinced of because of people that were planted, like the Grand Mufti, like those in the PLO, and that convinced the population on their side that our objective was to get rid of them and to kill them, because that's what they were taught, and that's what we were taught. And this is what I'm saying is where the problem relies, in our experience of one another.
So this brings to a very important next step, the future and education. No child is born to hate. And the brainwashing that goes on many sides, but from what I've been seeing, if you're a Palestinian child, you've got Jew hatred potentially coming at you from your parents, from family. You've got it at the mosque potentially. You've got it from TV. I think MEMRI, MEMRI, is a great thing for people to look up to see what's actually said in a lot of the Arab world. You've got it coming in school, in the books that probably take out Israel from the map, from what I've heard. There's verses in the Quran 650, I believe, talks about that maybe it's just the Jews of that time, and maybe it's only some of the Jews, but it connects us to being the descendants of apes and pigs.
Well, it's in the Hadith.
Hadith, okay. So how do we move forward? And I think we're both on the same page here about education being crucial. How can we ensure or promote a greater education for the next generation to look at us differently and look at the world differently?
So first of all, within Islam, Islam is the submission to Allah. That's why within Islam they see Moshe, Musa, as a Muslim. Although you didn't have Muhammad, you didn't have the Quran, they still see him as a Muslim because for them, a Muslim is someone who submits to Allah, to Hashem. So in their view, Judaism or Jews are also Muslims with our own teacher and our own direction. We have the Torah as for us, Musa, Moshe was our teacher and our prophet, and we need to follow the traditions and the way of Moshe, but it doesn't contradict the Quran and what others need to follow. And if you look at it, Jews are allowed to pray in mosques. We're not allowed to pray in a Buddhist temple. We're not allowed to pray in a Christian church, but we are allowed to pray in a mosque because the idea of oneness is something that unites us all, and we are also cousins. But if you look in the Quran, it's very interesting because whenever it talks about our people as the Yahuds, right, as the Jews, it's usually negative. When it talks about our people as the Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, it's usually positive. Is there something to say that they are against this idea of Jews being in the diaspora, Jews being mentally disconnected, Jews not following Torah, Jews not being, fulfilling the aspirations and being Ol Goyim, to try to empower others, to be the sort of immune system to the world? Whenever the Jews are disconnected from who they are and what they're supposed to do, we tend to suffer throughout history, but we tend to also be seen as negative within the Quran. And when Jews are united and know what they're supposed to do, we tend to rise up against all odds, and we tend to be seen as positive within the Quran. So there's something very beautiful to be seen in there of how other nations experience us. When we are who we're supposed to be and are strong, we're experienced as positive, and when we're not, we're experienced as negative, even though it's not written in those terms. Now, in terms of education, who is educating the Palestinians today? Who is controlling these textbooks, or even the soccer teams that are named after those that went and committed acts of terror, or streets named after them? I served in the IDF, and there was a time while I was in reserves that I served in Shechem, in Nablus, right? Which Nablus was renamed from Shechem as Neapolis by the Romans, and eventually, because there's no P sound in Arabic, it became Neapolis instead of Neapolis. Now, in that city, there's the Tomb of Yosef. And once a month or once every few months, Jews are allowed to go and pray into the Tomb of Yosef, and soldiers have to protect the passageway for Jews to be able to enter. So I was one of those soldiers. And if you look at it, I was walking down, and all of a sudden I see this statue. And I see this statue sort of three different figures. It was very artistic, very abstract, but it basically was an individual blowing himself up and rising to the sky. And on the bottom, there's a sign with a picture of the, not Al-Aqsa, but the Dome of the Rock. And on this picture, it said that the blood of Jerusalem is pure. Right? Basically saying that it's noble to go and commit acts of terror. But who chose to put that there? Who chose to write what they wrote in the textbooks? Who chose to show in the media? It's not the Palestinian people or the culture. It's those that are in leadership positions. And those that are in the leadership positions have an incentive to continue this conflict because that is how they're making money. That is why Yasser Arafat and other leaders, Mahmoud Abbas, Khalid Mashal, all these people, Ismail Haniyeh, they all have millions, if not billions of dollars. And it's not because they invested in Bitcoin at the right time or in Tesla. It's because they take the money that is being given to aid those that are currently suffering. So to continue having that stream of money, you have to continue this reality of suffering. To continue this suffering, you have to continue conflict. To continue conflict, you have to get people to be against each other. To do that, you have to educate people in the wrong way. Now, Israel, again, can't just remove the PA and Hamas right away. It could if it wanted to, but that would create a vacuum, and who knows what would replace. But it could start taking the moves to protect Palestinian lives. If I'm in Yehuda v'Shomron, if I'm in the West Bank, and something happens to me, the IDF will come looking for me and will help me. Any Jew. Because the IDF is there to protect the people, right? Not only Jews, but also Israelis or anyone who is traveling through Israel. Now, when it comes to Palestinians, some of my Palestinian friends that I work with all the time that disappear for 2 weeks because they normalize relations with Israelis and all of a sudden say, hey, we have to lay low for quite some time because we have so much heat on us and we're being pressured and we're being threatened. Why doesn't Israel protect those lives as well? Why doesn't Israel protect the next generation of leaders that want to rise up, that want to change the pop culture, that want to lead their people, that want to create a reality where we can coexist? Israel should be protecting those individuals in order for them to take the power, in order for them to one day overthrow the Palestinian Authority, which is illegitimate, or to overthrow Hamas, which is illegitimate. So it's not, again, I'm not saying that we are responsible. To the contrary, we're not responsible for what is going on, but we are responsible to fix it, because we have the power to do so. And we constantly talk as the Jewish people about tikkun olam and ol hagoyim, to empower other nations, to bring light to other nations, for them to fulfill their abilities and touch their potentials, or to fix the world. Well, how about we do tikkun babaytim abnei dodim first? Why don't we fix our own home with our own cousins, with our own family, before we're talking about fixing the rest of the world and helping other nations? That is a responsibility that we need to take. And we've tend to see this issue as, well, until they're not for us, we're going to continue building, we're going to continue growing, and we're not going to care about your suffering. We should see Palestinian suffering and feel it as if it's our suffering. We should see that as a reality. These are our cousins suffering on our land.
Even if it was self-caused by violence, not by the majority, but the reason there are checkpoints. I remember every time checkpoints would be loosened during the Intifada to make it easier on Palestinians to live, a suicide attack would happen. Now you could say that's one guy. Why should we blame the whole area? But unfortunately, you have to take bigger measures in order to protect your people. So there might be a sentiment that you brought this on yourself. However, what you're saying is we have the power to prop up those that can really make a difference, and that's the only way.
We need surgery instead of putting a band-aid. And yes, certain walls and checkpoints might minimize terror attacks, even though there are many places in this fence that's mostly a fence, not even mostly a wall, that is wide open. There are still terror attacks from within Israel and those coming through. So this doesn't prevent or remove terrorism. This doesn't remove suffering on either side.
It's not a long-term fix.
It's not, and we've gotten so comfortable that we think it is. We've gotten so comfortable that even bringing up the concept and the idea that this wall has to come down triggers people in the sense that they think that this necessarily means Jews will be dying. I'm not saying we need to remove the wall tomorrow or after tomorrow. I'd hope one day. But I'm saying at some point, this wall needs to come down. At some point, Palestinians need to be able to be treated equally and to have good lives. And at some point, we need to no longer be fighting each other and use this unity to create unity within the rest of the Middle East. And hopefully that will spark to the rest of the world.
I will say that anybody who, even the most jaded amongst us in the Jewish community about peace between the two, watching what's been going on with the Arab nations around making peace deals with Israel, who knows if Saudi Arabia is coming up, I think that is really a mind-blown time that we're in. That we talk about a messianic era where there's going to be peace in the world. It's really encouraging to see these peace deals that are going on. We can only hope that they continue. And I mean, talking about the next step and peace and what could happen, the two-state solution has been the go-to forever. When I was at Santa Barbara, UC Santa Barbara, and Dennis Ross, who's part of the Clinton administration, came to speak, I asked that question. I said, what's this push for two states? If many Palestinians polled say that they want to continue, this is during the Second Intifada, to be fair, want to continue the struggle, if it doesn't make sense to security-wise, to be, my family, I have cousins who live in Kochav Yair. Kochav Yair, where Ehud Barak lives, Kochav Yair, you see Tulkarm, or Kalkilia, I think it's Kalkilia. You see Kalkilia half a mile away. You see the villages. So if you're going to make a state like that, and to have power, to have a real army, theoretically, right there, to me it never made sense, and it was always the de facto position. You take history, you take Abraham buying Hebron, you take King David buying the Temple Mount. These are areas that weren't in Judea and Samaria, we call it, not the West Bank of the Jordan River, but Judea and Samaria was always part of our biblical homeland. I can't imagine Jews of that area giving it up without a fight. So you mix security with religion, with history. It's a very difficult proposition. We were both in Israel watching the disengagement from Gaza, just 8,000 settlers, that's all, and it was chaos in the country. Very big division. This is hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Jews who live in the area. So,
all with guns.
All with guns.
And the majority of Israel supports them being there, and the majority of the combat officers in the IDF are also religious Zionists. So you'd have a total civil war, and it's also something that would never happen, because in order to find a solution, you have to do two things for both peoples. You have to end the injustices that both experience, and you have to fulfill the aspirations that both require. And a two-state solution does neither for either. So to continue pushing this idea of two-state solution, it's similar to the story that I'm sure you know of King Solomon and the two mothers and the baby, where two mothers come to King Solomon, both claiming that this baby is theirs. King Solomon says, we're going to cut the baby in half. One mother says, no, it's okay, it's her baby, and the other mother says, yeah, it's fine, you can cut him in half. And to see who the real mother is, it's the mother that's not willing to cut her child in half. And so we need to be able to look at this land this way. If you're willing to cut this land in half, it's not your land. Right? Because this land is one, is Shalom, is not just something that you can just draw these, weird lines because the British and the French drew lines all over the Middle East, and we have this concept that we need to constantly have lines. We need to make this land whole and one for all people. So any solution that comes out, and there are many theories out there that have potential. None of them are one state or two state. We need to look at this as this is going to be one civilization, and the experience of the civilization for the peoples of this land is that this is their civilization that can be a part of. However, when it comes to peace, I think we need to start moving away from this word, because what does peace really mean? It means a point in time where two or more parties don't have an incentive to fight each other, right? If you look at Egypt and Israel, we have peace, but the peoples mostly in Egypt don't like Israel, don't like Jews. Mein Kampf is one of the bestsellers there. There are a lot of issues. So the meaning of peace is just like a non-violent continuation of the status quo. So I think we need to really talk about justice. We need to talk about how to fix the systemic problems that exist, how to fix the experiences and the suffering and the deaths and the displacements that both sides face. And once we fix those injustices that exist within the system, where the reality and the experience with the system provides justice, then that will provide peace. Peace is an outcome of first doing justice. And we tend to think that there are going to be some, US country that is going to come, which the US is one of the countries profiting the most from this conflict, is going to come and convince these Westerners to come and sign a piece of paper, in Ramallah or in Tel Aviv. It's not going to happen. The real movement is going to have to come from the ground, which is why in Israel I'm a part of a movement called Habayit, which unites the Jews that are living to the fullest of their aspirations of their people, that are living in Yudav and Shalom, also in other places in Israel, and Palestinians that are on the ground that are activists, some of which are very critical and they would identify very much so as anti-Israel. But they are anti-Israel because they're anti their experience of Israel, not because they're anti the idea that Israel should also have a right to exist, as long as they're included in this equation and they can experience this land as well as theirs. And I think by uniting those peoples and uniting our culture and having us realize who we are and how we can move forward is the way to move forward.
It's beautiful. The word for shalom, the word for peace in Hebrew is shalom. Shalom doesn't really mean peace. It means wholeness, completeness, that not half and half equal one, but 1 + 1 = 1. The idea that you can have, what's true peace? True peace is when you can have, it's not that somebody compromises who they are, another one compromises who they are, they change their identity, and then you find a way to become whole. You can think of a marriage like this. I'm going to have to change who I am, she's going to have to change who she is, and we'll make it work. It's like, no. We together can become one if we both have a higher shared purpose. If Muslims and Jews can say, we want to serve God, we want to live moral lives, we can find common ground, we can be different, fully ourselves and proud of it, and be able to come together because there's a higher shared purpose. I haven't changed, you haven't changed, we haven't had to change our entire existence to come together. We're fully who we are, but we see that there's a bigger plan. And in a marriage, the idea of that we are here together to build a home, to affect the world, to bring children into the world. We're here for a higher cause, and therefore we can both be ourselves, but we're always going to find ways to compromise, not essentially, but because of that higher purpose. So I definitely, I believe in the power of practical peace, but I also hope for the real, authentic peace as well.
Absolutely. This is not, I'm speaking, of course, and I hope to see in the future this reality, but if it's not there and there's a war, we definitely have to defend ourselves.
But without dreaming it, it definitely doesn't have a chance.
We need to create the steps and the moves in order to eventually get there. It's not just by speaking about it, but ideas can change, mindsets can change, actions can have an impact in the world that we live in, especially when an entire new generation comes in and an entire older generation leaves, and you really have a replacement of peoples and ideas within 100 years. Even, let's say, on a micro level on college campuses, within 4 years you have a brand new campus. So that's the same thing within 100 years, within a generation. If you change the way the younger generation experiences things, you can eventually change. But if we look at in the Torah, where the father, the patriarch of the Jewish people, we can say is Yaakov, but we can also say is Yitzchak, and we can also say is Avraham. Avraham is the father of the Semitic peoples, the Middle Easterns, right? Jews and Arabs included. And if we look at the Arabs, they're the children of Ishmael. If we look at the Jews, they're the children of Yitzchak.
Brothers.
Yitzchak and Ishmael are brothers and don't like each other. Not because they know of each other, but because they don't know each other. They actually don't experience each other because Ishmael and Yitzchak are separated. Eventually, when Abraham dies, they come back and they bury their father. And this is really their first time that they really interact and get to know one another. And then they realize that they're not enemies at all. And they're able to actually find this shalom or shalem and create unison. So I think that the problem exists, whereas the Arab Muslim world and the Jewish world don't know each other. We have not experienced each other. And if we start building this relationship, or even on the more micro level, the Israelis and the Palestinians, if we start building this relationship, we understand that our aspirations and our needs do not contradict one another. And there are many things happening today that I see a lot of change. For example, TikTok is one of the newer social media platforms, usually that very much so a lot of younger people, Gen Z, are using TikTok. And it's not just based on the algorithms out there of what you like Facebook and Instagram. If you're liking a certain post or a certain type of content, you tend to see this over and over again. But it's also based on your geolocation. So as someone who lives in Israel and has TikTok, I can tell you that on TikTok, Israelis and Palestinians of the younger generation are actually able to see each other's content. because they're in the same very proximity of the location. And so they're experiencing each other's expression of humanity and art and suffering and pain and humor. And because they're able to experience one another, it allows a level of understanding the humanity of the other side. And where you had a wall where you couldn't experience one or the other, if it was, a terrorist that you'd hear in the media or an IDF soldier that did something bad in your experience, you'd always experience each other in that way. But now you're able to actually experience each other by the people and who they are in their essence. And I think there are a lot of moves that are changing the situation where Israelis and Palestinians are realizing that they're not supposed to be each other's enemies.
I think it's very powerful that Muhammad in 648 to the Jewish people coming officially 1948, 1300 years, some say corresponding to the circumcision is done at 13 years old in Islam. And this idea of Ishmael was terrorizing Isaac during his childhood, but they did come back at the end to make peace. And maybe all that difficulty of history, we're now coming to that time, hopefully, of that peace. You referenced the Torah, and I'm a big fan, and you had a post recently putting on tefillin, and I loved it. And you mentioned a point that I think is very important. We get so bogged down in titles of Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, Masorti, every type of name. And Judaism it's who you are. It's what I would call a spiritual DNA. It's what makes you up. It doesn't matter. Some observe more, some observe less traditionally, but it doesn't take away the soul. It doesn't take who you are away, which I think is a crucial idea in our time. Can you talk about how your Jewish spiritual identity has evolved over time? And I'm really glad you joined my class, my Kabbalistic class on the Hebrew letters. It was great to have you, and clearly you're into learning it and growing all the time. So love to hear how that's played a role in your life.
For sure. So I grew up, although I had a parent that was Ashkenazi and a parent that was Sephardic, my father's side never grew up with any sort of Ashkenazi culture, because during the Holocaust they decided to sort of reject anything related to Torah and just remove it completely. They didn't do Shabbat, they didn't do Kippur, and so I grew up with a father that was very proud of being Jewish, but did not grow up with any sort of Ashkenazi culture. So he sort of adopted my mom's side of the family, the Sephardic culture, and I was raised fully Sephardic. And in Sephardic and Mizrahi and Ethiopian and other communities that are not Ashkenazi, you don't have this division of Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform, because these are divisions that exist within the church that was then imposed onto the Jewish experience of Ashkenazi Jews in Europe. And so it's not a way to divide ourselves. Now, as you said, there are Jews that are more observant and Jews that are less observant. And it's also not about just observing, right? Putting tefillin is not about you just need to do it. You need to have a kavanah, an intention, an understanding of why you're doing this. You're connecting your body and your soul, and you're meditating and you're focusing, and the words that you're saying aren't just words to recite. You need to know what these words mean. You need to understand these words. You need to then apply these words. These are reminders every day that you're reminding yourself, like you're externalizing in order to re-internalize, in order to apply to your life, in order to grow. So I see Judaism not as a way of life of restriction or of necessity that you need to do this in order to just do it. You need to do it in order to understand it and to grow. And that's why we're called Am Israel. Israel is the name of Yaakov that he receives when he fights the angel and rises up to Hashem, because he's wrestling with Hashem. And this wrestling is not the concept of negatively being against and fighting Hashem. To the contrary, it's wrestling in order to understand, to apply to one's life, and to be able to grow. And I think each individual has their own wrestling match, and that wrestling match never has an end. You're constantly on that wrestling match. You're constantly growing, whether in this lifetime, previous lifetimes, and future lifetimes. And so that's how I have my relationship with Hashem and understanding of Judaism, is that we are part of one nation, one civilization, one people from this land, connected to this land. We also have a collective purpose, but as individuals, we also need to spread light, not only as a collective, but also as individuals. And we need to understand that our belief system, and that our culture, and that our traditions, and that our Torah, and that our land are supposed to be applied in order to elevate and not just to stay static.
I think it's so important to have a reframe or a perspective shift on anything you do, to really appreciate it. When I look at Judaism, I never call it a religion, ever. To me, it's a relationship. It's a relationship with God, and everything we do is a way to strengthen that relationship. If I meet a friend who only goes to synagogue on Yom Kippur and he says, I don't really feel much, I'm like, I don't blame you, man. Like, if you call your girlfriend once every 365 days, you're not going to build that intimate, vulnerable, open connection. It has to be a daily practice you bring into your life. And every extra thing anyone does, and anything is good. If you call that one time a year, it's awesome. You call your grandmother once a year, it's not nothing, it's something. But the more we do or the less we do, the more we're able to find our unique way to connect within Judaism and really come to love that all the wisdom that's found in it is really needed in our time.
You know, I find it so important in this day and age where there are many rabbis that are great in terms of the knowledge that they carry and the way that they teach those that are similar to their communities, but they tend to, a lot of them, not all of them, miss the mark on trying to reach out to those that are usually in the younger generation and that may have had a different upbringing or didn't have a connection at all to Judaism growing up, and it's not their fault. They tend to not be able to pass that line and to really grab them and make them understand that Judaism isn't just something to restrict you and something to follow just because you have to, and if you don't do something, something will come and haunt you. But to the contrary, you need to apply Judaism into your life in order to grow and to understand and to go deeper and to become a better person and to make this world a better place. And I think that type of way of expressing Judaism is very rare today in this day and age, and I'm very appreciative of you as a rabbi doing that, because myself, I'm not a rabbi. I'm a Jewish rights activist, I'm a human being, I'm an individual, I may be from the Levite tribe, but I hold no sort of position when it comes to spirituality, although I can have my own opinions. You are a spiritual teacher, a guider, someone who's supposed to be the person that people reach out to for questions regarding the Torah. And I also reach out to you sometimes for questions regarding the Torah. And so I think it's so beautiful to find people that are younger, that they understand the younger generation and are able to take the Torah and be teachers, but apply that in a way that actually works for those today that really need it.
Thank you, brother, and for reflecting that. And I was thinking before this discussion about, like, why is your message resonating so much with everybody? And I truly believe we're in a time where we're nearing the redemption of the world and of our people. And where were we? What were we like in the times of the heyday, in the times of King David and King Solomon and Abraham and the tribes? The Jewish people were strong. The Jewish people were a light onto the nations. They were setting an example. We were. I think what you're doing is, it's when we watch you speak and you have composure and you have strength and you have clarity and you go for it. For us, it's almost like a liberating feeling, because we're not used to the Jewish people being able to speak our minds. I mean, if you wanted to, either me teaching Torah publicly or you defending a belief in Judaism publicly, you could be sentenced to death for that. The ability to go out, unless a priest or a governing official forced you for a debate, it wasn't something we were able to do. And now we have the ability to use our voice, and unfortunately many aren't. So watching you do what you do is really a feeling that we're like entering a new time. It's even beyond all the beautiful things and the importance of what you're doing. To me, I think it symbolizes to all of us a feeling that we can go back to our inner greatness, our inner potential of what the Jewish people are meant to be and what we really can be and the beauty we can bring to the world. So I want to really encourage you and fortify, if you haven't gotten it enough. I'm sure you're getting the feedback, but no matter how bad or good it gets, just know that your soul is doing its mission on this earth that is making God proud and is making all of us proud. And I hope you really continue your success and keep going strong.
Amen.
Thank you, man.
Thank you.